Hi, my name is Kevin Sitz, and I'm the director of the Writing Support Center here in the UC Davis Academic Assistance and Tutoring Centers. And I just want to record this quick video to talk through thesis statements, arguments, as well as MLA citations. So if you want to download a copy of these slides, I'll put a link in the YouTube description, or you can go ahead, pause the video, and copy them down now. So here's our quick agenda for today. We're going to go into thesis statements, then we're going to talk about argumentation, how that works in something called the taxes paragraph structure. We'll talk through some MLA resources, and then finally some services at the AATC for UC Davis students. So we know that the writing process has a lot of twists and turns, and sometimes it helps to revisit your essay and outline form as you draft. Or sometimes it's helpful to begin with an outlining structure if you're just beginning your paper. So either way, we can take a look at this structure and how it can benefit your writing. So I think one way to accomplish this is taking your thesis statement and then connecting it to the taxes structure can be a beneficial way to really see if your argument is on track and how your different topics are supporting those ideas that you're bringing up within the thesis. So what makes a thesis statement? So this is adapted from Techniques for College Writing by Castle and Moore, as well as the taxes structure is also brought up in that volume as well. So they show us that there's really three main elements in a thesis: the context or big idea, the subject or thing that we're analyzing, and then finally the claim that we're trying to make. So that means a thesis statement might be one sentence or a couple sentences. We could also see this structure working for the opening of the opening introductory paragraph as well. So we might think about, well, what is this paper about overall to help us set the context? What's the specific thing that we're trying to study, figure out more about in the subject? And then finally, how are you planning to defend it in the paper to really narrow that claim, something that has to be defendable? So in addition to that, the OWL Purdue has 4 elements to consider when drafting your thesis. And what we'll go ahead and do next is take a look at a sample thesis and look at those 4 elements. And again, I've linked them here in the presentation if you download the slides and wanted to take a look at them later on your own. So once you've read a story or novel more closely, you want to kind of take a look at your notes for patterns, or maybe you've got questions or ideas that really interest you. And you might ask yourself, have most of your questions been about the characters, or is it about how something changes, whether in the overall context that the story was written, or maybe within characters within the fictional work itself? Again, this example is more so drawn from analyzing a work of fiction, but you could consider too whether or not characters, maybe we swap that out for variables, or we swap that out for themes within the text, or important principles. So for example, here, if you're reading Shakespeare's Hamlet, do you seem to be most interested in what the author has to say about society, maybe at the time? So maybe we choose a pattern of ideas or something that we found that was really interesting to us in the text, and we want to ask ourselves in the form of a question and answer that question to start building a thesis. So for example, this is just sort of one question I might ask myself in my notes as I'm reading through Hamlet, and I say, what does Shakespeare's Hamlet seem to be suggesting about society at the time, as well as how it could be applied to society today? And the answer to that question I came up with was that Shakespeare's audience would see that the supernatural can be a clear force to inspire action in his time, whereas today the audience would be more prone to read the ghost as more metaphorical or figurative. So again, I've adapted this from the Purdue OWL. You'll see some other examples using a very similar structure on their website, just in case you want to, again, pause and take a look at that resource yourself. Something that the OWL Purdue also brings up is that some pitfalls can be choosing too many ideas, or maybe choosing an idea that we wouldn't be able to support with any kind of evidence from the text, either primary or secondary sources. So that's something to kind of keep in mind as well. So once you have a general point to focus on, we generate some possible ideas and answer the questions that maybe they suggest. So for example, how does Shakespeare present the audience with the ghost in Hamlet. And what I'd argue is he uses a supernatural figure to link this concept of duty to vengeance. And again, this is also taken from those steps on the Purdue Owl. So next, we'd go to turning those questions and answers around and take that pre-writing that we've already generated based on overall questions that we're interested in. Kind of a synthesis here is we've got some big picture ideas, we've got a very specific subject that we're trying to analyze. So where do we get to a claim? So here's what I've come up with, that in his play, Hamlet, Shakespeare uses supernatural characters to push for vengeance. This may suggest that people hundreds of years ago may have seen a ghost as a plausible character given the circumstances, but many in today's audience would see the ghost as representing something else, or have a hard time seeing the ghost as part of events as they really happened. Again, I developed that based on thinking, how would an audience really react to a ghost? Has that changed over time as audiences have changed culturally? So now as you keep moving forward, you want to think about, well, what do I need to support that thesis? So you have to find your evidence. Again, this is that way of argumentation where first we narrow to something that we want to say about the text based on reading it, but then we have to look, okay, what would we use to back that up and build our body paragraphs around? And again, with this thesis being about a change in how people view the supernatural and how that shows up in literature or drama or other media, I think the thesis really hinges on an idea of how widespread belief in the supernatural has really changed over time, at least in Anglo-American culture. And so to support this, I would need to find supernatural events in the text first, like, for example, the ghost confronting Hamlet, as well as I'd probably need some secondary sources to help show that belief in the public has really shifted from the 1600s to now the 21st century, and how people think about the supernatural. How many people believe in ghosts, for example, might be something that an audience member might be curious about. So then we'll move into the actual academic paragraphs here. So if that's setting the stage for my introduction and my thesis, well, how do we actually start building our paragraphs? And again, this is taken from Techniques for College Writing as well. And they use a device that's easy to remember in the sense that it's taxes. And that stands for T for topic sentence, A for an assertion statement, X stands for the examples, E is the explanation, and S is the significance. And there's a box around the examples and significance here on the screen, because this is what I'd really be digging through my readings and my source material to make sure that I had that concrete detail that could back up those assertions that are making not only paragraphs, but really back to the thesis as well. And I also really wanted to emphasize that whenever we're building an argument, sometimes what I see is people have the beginning, the topic sentence that really captures the whole paragraph, the assertion that presents an idea about that topic, and then sometimes it just ends on a quote. But as a reader, I need to know, how does that quote, or how does that summary, or how does that paraphrase really reinforce or prove the assertion, so to speak? And then finally, the broader significance is, how does it relate to the thesis and the argument as a whole? So we'll take a closer look at this with the Hamlet example. So we'll kind of slow down and go through each stage. So the topic sentence, again, envelops the paragraph's main idea, and potentially you might see themes or elements in the introduction or conclusion of your paper that really hint at what these topics are going to be. We don't necessarily need a thesis that has every single topic embedded within the thesis, but again, maybe something, again, just from things we've been working on in this exercise, like, maybe something about Shakespeare, maybe something about England in the 1600s. These could all be possible topics that I've been talking about in the introduction. So here's an example of a topic sentence, and this says, in William Shakespeare's Hamlet, the main character is confronted by the ghosts of his father and told to revenge his murder. And so in this case, and this was a piece of writing, I believe, taken from a sample paragraph that someone had written. So I want to give a shout out to Melissa Bender, who's a faculty member in the UC Davis University Writing Program, for pulling this paragraph out. And anyway, that kind of lets us know that this is all going to be about that confrontation with the ghost. So next we move to the assertion. And so the assertion supports the topic sentence and the overall paragraph. We know that this must come from the writer. There's rarely a source attached to an assertion being made. That said, maybe there could be one if we're using agreement with someone else's assertion or something like that, but less likely in this case, because it's really presenting the paragraph's claim, what you, the writer, are trying to convince me, the reader, of. And it's connecting the topic sentence really to the example. So in this case, the next sentence of the paragraph might read, the audience of the day accepted the event unreservedly. The question was not whether the ghost was real or not, but whether it was actually the ghost of the dead king or the devil in disguise trying to trick Hamlet. And so we move from there into our example. So these have to support the assertion. We can't just go around making assertions without any evidence to back them up. That's where sometimes students tell me they get a little nervous that, oh, I don't want to just show too much opinion in my paper. And I think a lot of times arguments are based on someone's reading of the evidence, and to that extent, an opinion, but it's an opinion rooted in evidence that we've actually found in the text. So this is where we have to find really immediate and tangible examples for our reader. I know in this structure, it sounds like there's like one topic, one assertion, one example. Maybe there's a couple examples that belong in this paragraph. But most importantly, we can't just leave the example without any sort of interpretation of it afterwards. So here's an example. If a similar scenario were presented today, the audience would be much more reluctant to accept the idea of a ghost as possibly existing in real life. Now, something as I'm kind of just looking at this sample paragraph, I mean, I'd probably want a citation here. This is where it comes from, the secondary literature. I want to know, well, why? Why have attitudes changed? How do I know that for sure, actually, that there wouldn't be people viewing a ghost story and going, you know, I see that as plausible. I could see ghosts trying to manipulate the events of Denmark way back when. So notice that, and I just want to show this here, that the example is always a red flag to check if you've cited something. Paragraphs are often built around textual evidence of some kind, whether primary or secondary. So that's something to always check as you're reading through your example. So then once we get to the explanation, that ensures that the example isn't just left there. It's an opportunity to offer a brief discussion to justify why you included that example. And it also shows why the evidence is relevant and how it connects to the rest of the paragraph. So here's a way to explain that evidence from before, saying that audience opinions have shifted. And so the audience would maybe question Hamlet's sanity, perhaps his sobriety, and speculate on the seriousness of the work if forced to see this as an accurate reporting on a historical event. And I might even revise to say, especially if we're really thinking of today's audience and trying to say, oh, do you believe that a ghost would have really prompted someone to go out for revenge? So the final component of this method is tying the paragraph up with some significance, and the significance really makes sure that this paragraph belongs to the whole essay. It's a way to help the reader relate back to your thesis in some way, and significance is necessary to show the big picture implications of the essay's claim. So really kind of think about the significance, the topic sentence. These are kind of like the bread of the sandwich, and the paragraph falls apart without them. So we need to have both to not only show something important, but also why it's important. So the significance is that this is not due to a change in the human mind that has taken place over the years, but a change in the way people are taught to view such events. So just culture around the supernatural has changed. Again, part of argumentation here, I think where we see it is maybe the topic sentence and the example in this structure are more declarative statements, something that's just telling us what a topic is. Here's a quote from the text, but really assertions, how we explain evidence, and finally how we relate it back to the thesis are all opportunities to weave in our argument as we've set up in the thesis statement. So again, kind of recapping the introduction, that this should really give us a tangible background. It acts as a predictor for the rest of the paper. And a lot of times what readers are expecting is that it's like a camera that zooms in. We start broadly, but then we narrow our focus. For example, most broadly, we could talk about the supernatural in art, but let's really focus in here on Hamlet and the ghost. And then finally, what do we want to say about it? Audience opinions are shifted just in the way that they're encountering that ghost within the play. So then as we wrap it up with our conclusion, really we can flip it upside down in terms of how we're re-emphasizing the main points. Maybe we're presenting the main ideas or thesis in a new way with added reflection, because now your reader has the benefit of going through all of your argumentation and seeing all your evidence. It contains the significance of the essay and perhaps proposes a new course of action. What should people study in the future? How could this connect to other plays? For example, for using Hamlet, or maybe how does it connect to the theater today? I don't know. These could all be directions we'd want to go. We just want to make sure that we're avoiding new evidence like a new quote from Hamlet or a new quote from the secondary literature, because then the reader might get a little confused in terms of, is this making a new argument here? And again, with all of these structures are all to be taken within the context of what your professor is asking of you, what those expectations are for your field or discipline. Things might be a little bit different in terms of thesis placement or things like that. Again, this is just a general guide of thinking about how to put an argument together. So in doing so, again, we could think that introduction going from the broad to the specific to the claim. Maybe there's a couple sections, and so I could write out literally on my notebook or my word processing program that, okay, I can just go taxes, start filling in either examples that I've caught from the reading that I think are really interesting, or maybe specific topics. And then finally, I go to my conclusion where I flip the structure of the introduction. I go, okay, here's the very specific claim I've been making. Here's how it's related to that subject of analysis. And then finally, here's how this matters for the wider world. So again, if you're doing this as part of a class activity, this is a great time to pause and consider how your own outline, or maybe how your own draft maybe falls into this structure. Could you make a taxes outline, so to speak, of where you could have your thesis, but also all of those different topics and examples that the paper relies on to help defend that thesis? So it's a good time to pause and try that out. And if not, we'll continue with a few more resources. So at UC Davis, remember the Shields Library is here for you. They have office hours to help with citations. They also have a 24/7 chat function to help you find sources. And the important piece to take away here is that citations really function as part of this academic conversation that we're having. If you looked something up, that's an indication that needs to be cited. If it's not part of common knowledge, like for example, Shakespeare was a playwright, but instead if I've got some very specific lines in Hamlet, things like that, I've got to cite them. If I've got a very specific article I looked up to tell me about Elizabethan England, got to cite that. And I have a link here for in case you're interested in that help function at the library. The Shields Library also has a great MLA quick guide. I'll also put a link to this in the YouTube description, so you have a copy of that. And on the next few slides, I'll just share some highlights from that guide. So this just comes from the guide directly verbatim. And important part here is if you have a quote, it needs to be followed by parentheses with the author's name and the page number that it came from. If I include the author's name in the sentence, then notice here, like Hyde notices that a large percentage of the suicides in this category are centered in the New York City area. Since Hyde is part of the sentence, the page number just goes at the end. I don't have to repeat Hyde. Versus up here, Hyde was not a part of the actual sentence, so it goes at the end. And then you omit a parenthetical reference if you're citing the entire work, like you're summarizing the whole article, which is what's happening in this final sentence, that Hyde argues that suicide among the young constitutes a national epidemic. And then if you have multiple authors, this slide shows a few ways to do that. You'd separate authors by a semicolon down here if you're using multiple authors. If you have more than one author, you'd go with the two names. If you have three or more, you can use the et al. Abbreviation. If you've got an author that's written more than one thing, so maybe Shakespeare and Hamlet versus Shakespeare and Romeo and Juliet, we'd use a short title and the page number just to help the reader know which Shakespeare thing that was that we're citing. So lastly, if you have any questions and you go to UC Davis here, we're always happy to help. Here's my email address in case you'd like to get in touch with me. We also have our website, and for UC Davis undergraduate students, we offer one-on-one appointments. We offer a submit writing for feedback service, as well as a drop-in writing studio. And also just want to advertise that we have a free online Aggie grammar guide for anyone to access. It's searchable with some great practice activities in case you're wondering about more sentence level concerns or grammatical concepts that maybe your TA or professor brought up. So thanks very much for participating in this asynchronous workshop, and we're always happy to help at the AATC. Take care.